All right, Panther Lair, let's talk about the lineup that featured Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham in the Pittsburgh Panthers victory over the Boston College Eagles this past Saturday. Now, after the game, head coach Jeff Capel did confirm that this was the first time that Federico and Diaz-Graham had shared the floor together at the same time all season. It was something that he did shortly after Blake Hinson picked up his second foul in the first half, and they did it briefly when the game was already decided late in the second half. But I want to take a look at some of those possessions and give you my thoughts on what I saw. Now, I think the big thing that we know in terms of what Guillermo is defensively is he's not going to hold up well in the post, and that as a perimeter defender, he certainly has a lot of questions. And I think that would have been the first thing that I would have been worried about is when you put him out there as now like guarding the 4, maybe potentially could switch on to the 5 and let Federico guard the 4, that he's not going to hold up well defending on the perimeter. And that was certainly true in this very first sequence here. We're going to play it out. Now, granted, like Prince Ajib, like he is mostly going, he's averaging, I think, 5.4 points a game. He scored no points in this game in 12 minutes. He shoots like 15% on 3-pointers. So not a guy that's really going to hurt you from the perimeter. So I think this lineup is going to be limited to, any time that the 4-man is not a perimeter-oriented player. But for teams that don't have that 4-man that can really hurt you from the outside, and he's more of maybe just kind of like a scrapper, slasher, I think that Guillermo can hold up well enough that this could be used a little bit more in the future. It's certainly something that Capel alluded that he's going to put a little bit more time in given the success. So take a look at this first possession, and this kind of confirms what I was afraid of. So both Federico and Guillermo are, really, really sagging in the paint here to help Leggett against Zachary. That makes sense. I think Leggett could hold up well in the post. I think you only really have to have Federico here, but given the screening action was occurring up top, I think an inbound roller was likely to happen. But when this ball gets kicked out, if Guillermo takes probably the worst closeout that you can maybe take against a guy who is absolutely not a threat to hit this 3-pointer and gets spun around. So it was very clear that he was going to probably put the ball on the floor. But what ends up working out most of the time is if this would have been Federico up top, there'd be zero rim protection here, depending on where Zach Austin was. But instead, Federico's just waiting in the paint. And between the length of Federico and just a lot more arms and humanity from Guillermo, this ends up being a rebound for Pitt. That was probably the worst defensive possession I think I saw. And again, it was, I think, the first one when they were on the floor together. So all said and done, not the worst thing. I think a softer closeout would have helped against a guy only shooting 15%. But, hey, it didn't really come back and hurt the Panthers at all. So in the second one, in the third sequence, what I really think is interesting about this lineup is now you have Guillermo in help more. Now, before Jorge got hurt, Jorge Diaz-Graham, we saw how effective he can be on the backside of plays with his length and how he can just like erase skip passes and how disruptive he was at the top of like Pitt's like zone actions and like zone schemes and things. So Guillermo can have a similar effect. So when he's helping off the ball, what happens a lot of the time are that these players just come into a lot of arms, a lot of length, a lot of humanity. So here you're involving Federico in a ball screen situation, and this pocket pass is going to put this rolling player here with such an advantage. But because the help defender is going to be Guillermo, that really doesn't do much of anything for Boston College. And again, a lot of arms, a lot of humanity, and this just ends up being a turnover for them. Or sorry, rather a missed shot. This is a turnover here at the end. And same thing here. You're just going to notice the screen half is pretty good by Guillermo. He's purposeful. And when post spins back into the lane here and it's Guillermo here, maybe Austin again could probably have done some damage here. But the fact that there's a 7-footer and now another 6'11" guy that you're spinning into with the ball above your head, this just is really a tough situation for any offensive player. And when you think about how effective Quentin Post was, I think it's, like doubly damaging that like this was one way they were able to sort of limit him, I guess. So from a defensive standpoint, and that's where I would have questions pretty much with a lineup like this, it mostly worked. It only can work in situations, again, where the 4-man or, Guillermo's primary assignment is not going to run him through too many screens, is not a player that can really challenge him off the ball too much and get into the lane, but against a player who's likely going to just kind of like straight line drive you the way that Prince Ajib is going to be. I think that is probably a much better scenario here. Good spot for Jeff Capel to use this, knowing that was probably going to be the case, given the fact that I think Ajib has started like 21 games this year. So likely going to face him. knew that he was a 15% outside percent three-point shooter, and as long as Guillermo held up well in terms of some slashes, he was going to be able to help off him enough to make impacts like you just saw here, like against Quentin Post. So should we see this more? Will we see this more? I think so, depending on the matchup. Also, I think Pitt really only wants to play 7 guys. I like Will Jefferson a lot as a person. I think that he is a really good defender in certain spots. Offensively, he struggles. He was, the Pitt, I think, ended up going or conceding like a 2 or 12-2 run to Boston College when Hinson went out before this lineup kind of shifted into this 2 big guy lineup. So it's something I think Pitt wants to avoid. So if they can get away playing 7 guys a little bit more, especially as these games become more critical, I think they'll continue to do that. So this is just kind of the first sample here, at least of the defensive sequences.